And it's once again the same thing that we're already talking about. The space of possibilities is always much larger than we can comprehend. That's true for the space of scientific theories. It's true for the space of books in a library or novels or the space of DNA, genomes, whatever. It's just very, very easy to have a combinatorial set of things where you just list one letter of an alphabet over another that very quickly becomes larger than the human mind can comprehend. And the question is, how do you search through this space of possibilities?
Hello, and welcome back to Tomato Tomato. I'm your host, Talia Sherman. Today, I'm interviewing Sean Carroll, the Homewood Professor of Natural Philosophy at Johns Hopkins University and host of the excellent podcast, Sean Carroll's Mindscape: Science, Society, Philosophy, Culture, Arts, and Ideas. I wanted to interview someone in a completely new field. Not a computational linguist who happens to be in a computer science department, not a neurolinguist in a neuroscience lab, but a theoretical physicist and a philosopher. But as you'll soon see, Sean's going to push you and me out of our comfort zone to think about the symbiotic ecological relationships between disciplines. Ultimately, I think this episode is about science and scholarship. Sean and I both host podcasts. We both interview people in a panoply of different disciplines, and we're often thinking about similar things, namely the political dimensions of academic inquiry, teleology, interdisciplinarity, and the importance of public scholarship. Sean in particular will move us into the subjunctive. As you just heard, the space of possibilities is larger than the mind can comprehend. So it's our job as scholars to think beyond what's given, what's happening right now around you, and think about what could happen, perhaps what would happen if certain constraints were lifted. If we suffered a mass extinction, what would life look like, and why? If the mouth were configured differently, how would phonetic change have been different from the beginning? If a language dies out and a new hybrid language forms, what are the possibilities and impossibilities? And then what happens when we think about this space of possibilities combinatorially versus probabilistically versus normatively? These are questions imperative to science, but I would also argue instructive for all disciplines. And I definitely don't want to equate what we do at all, but I want to draw connections. Whether it's theoretical physics, literary theory, sociolinguistics, neuroscience, what have you, this is definitionally awesome. So please welcome back into your ears, Sean Carroll. Sean Carroll, welcome to Tomato Tomato. I'm really excited to have you here today.
Thanks very much for inviting me on.
Okay, so to start, please introduce yourself. Tell everyone who you are, what you do, and why.
I'm Sean Carroll. I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins University, and I'm a theoretical physicist by training. These days, I also moonlight as a philosopher, so I'm a faculty in the philosophy and the physics departments at Hopkins.
Okay. And what else do? You're a podcaster. You've consulted on lots of movies and TV shows and things like that.
Right. I'm old enough to have done many things. I am mostly a research professor. I write papers about cosmology and gravity and quantum mechanics and emergence and complexity. I also have my own podcast called Mindscape, which comes out every week, and I interview all sorts of interesting people. I also write books. My most recent one was called Quanta and Fields. It's book 2 of a 3-book trilogy called The Biggest Ideas in the Universe. And I do various things, go around giving talks and generally having a good time learning about the universe and sharing what I've thought about.
Right. So Mindscape is one of my favorite podcasts. I've
Thank
listened
you.
to many episodes. And you interview a lot of people, a lot of really important people. We've actually interviewed one person in common. We have Steve Pinker in common. But you've interfaced with him a lot more than I have. You've also interviewed a lot of Nobel Prize winners. But if this doesn't happen, I'll cut it out. But I believe next month I will be interviewing the son of someone that you've interviewed.
Oh, wait, let me guess. The son of someone I've interviewed. No, I have no idea.
I'm emailing back and forth with Kian Vafa, son of Kumran Vafa.
Oh, okay, good. Yep, that was one of the options. Okay, very, very good.
Yeah, so that's another connection. But your podcast, you interview people from a lot of different STEM fields: physics, chemistry, political science. I guess that's somewhat of a science, and philosophy and things like that. But recently, you did your holiday message for the end of 2025, and you talked about the romance of the university. And you made a pitch for why a liberal arts education is critical now more than ever. You talked about how we want to focus on people as processes. We want to think about the becoming rather than the being of who we are, moving away from essence and process. So what's up with the universities? Why was that a message important now more than ever? And why is that kind of a radical thing to say, that the liberal arts education is so vital?
I think there's probably a fascinating story. I guess I was going to say to be written, but maybe someone has written it and I don't know. But, universities have absolutely grown and changed over the years. And Johns Hopkins, where I am at, in fact, I noticed just now, it wasn't intentional, but behind me, there's the Johns Hopkins 150th birthday scarf that I was recently given. And Hopkins likes to say they were the first research university, by which they mean they're certainly not older than Harvard or UPenn or whatever, but those places were founded as colleges and they gradually grew into research universities, whereas Hopkins started life as a research university from the beginning. And it was not until the middle of the 20th century, really, that there was this grand bargain struck between the government and the universities, where the government would pay grant money to university professors to do their research. And honestly, it's a lot cheaper than doing it yourself or having industry do it. So universities get the money and the government gets a lot of research from it. But of course, at the same time, universities are supposed to be teaching people, right? And colleges and universities both. But I think that, in recent decades, there's been this sort of maybe inevitable move to think about your college education as something that is supposed to help you get a job. It always was supposed to help you get a job, but I think that aspect of it has been emphasized more and more to the extent that we've forgotten the romantic parts of the college education, the part about forming who you are, not just getting you a job, thinking deeply about the great ideas and things like that. It's a political football, of course. People always want to impose their political views on the university curriculum. But I thought it was just important to remember that the most important thing about the university is not that it's a job training program, that it's an important formative part of your life, and that studying broadly in the liberal arts and sciences is the most important aspect of that, in addition to whatever else you want to study, engineering or nursing or business or whatever. They're all good, but there is something foundational and central and crucially important about the liberal arts and sciences.
Okay, so because you do this so well on your podcast, I want to try to disagree in a way that's as respectful and clear as the way you do on yours.
Love it.
Which is, I want to push back slightly because I think that my perception is that we have not forgotten necessarily the romantic parts of the university, but that when people talk about the superfluous parts of the university, the parts that are not for job training, they focus specifically on the humanities and the social sciences. And they want to preserve computer science, they want to preserve chemistry, and they want to preserve math because those are the majors, the disciplines that will train you to go get a job. But the ones that are sort of useless are the ones that maybe I study. And I want to push back on that idea because I think that it's all correlational, not causational. I see no reason to believe that an English major doesn't prepare you to make a ton of money, however much you want. And I see or any other major. And it's just more selection bias that students who are less attached to that kind of lifestyle go into English because maybe they grew up with money and they're okay kind of taking that gamble. You see a lot more first-gen low-income students taking economics and computer science. So that's the way that I would push back on it, is I think that people are in support of the liberal arts education, but it's like take 10 computer science classes and one art history class. Really feed your soul, like 1 out of 10, right? And that's the part that I would push back on. I think that it's kind of insane to think that social science courses and humanities courses can't prepare you to get a job.
And I would say that is also true. I mean, I think as a faculty member in a philosophy department, we are quite aware that we get some of the best students, by GPA and grade scores and things like that. And our students have some of the highest incomes once they graduate, despite the nominal uselessness of a philosophical education. Once you've studied philosophy, you can do lots of different things. It doesn't have to be becoming a philosophy professor. But that's not what my point was in the little podcast. I could have said that indeed studying the liberal arts and the humanities very well will prepare you to get a very good job. But what I wanted to emphasize was strictly that there is more out there than getting a good job. I think that studying math and computer science and physics is also worthwhile, even if you don't want to do math or computer science or physics. They train your brain in a very important way. So I didn't want to didn't want to deny that you could get a good job by studying the humanities or anything like that. Far from it. I just want to say that it's worth doing even if that was never your goal. Even if you always wanted to be a professional basketball player, it's still a good idea to get a broad-based liberal arts and sciences education.
I agree. I agree. And I will also point out that philosophy majors get the best LSAT scores. So another reason
Yeah. Yeah. Philosophy is it's the glamour subfield, no doubt.
you think it's glamorous. Okay.
Yes.
I guess that leads to another question, which is kind of about the glamour of disciplines. So I've noticed over time with your podcast that I feel like you've begun to talk about politics a little bit more specifically. I think in general, people say things like all scholarship is political and all disciplines have a political teleology. And then people fight about teleology in general, because I know that you've done a lot of debates on whether our sort of natural physical systems are teleological. And I feel like I'm definitely totally on your side that they're not. But people talk about the teleology of disciplines, period. And people talk about the glamour of disciplines. And I think that there's been a push for applied physics and applied math and experimental physics and experimental sciences and not theoretical physics or philosophy. And so I wanted to ask about that. Why do you think that's happening? But also, why is it important that we study theoretical physics and philosophy? And what's going on there with the politicization of academic disciplines? Something that has been happening for a long time, but is just really relevant right now.
Well, I think there's a number of different things going on, so it's important to sort of separate them. I mean, on the one hand, yes, there are claims that all disciplines are political, and in some sense that's true, but this is also a vastly oversimplifying, catchy motto. This is not a careful analysis of what's going on. Theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, or something like that is not political in the same way that gender studies or sociology or history can be political. Those fields actually directly study substantive questions of political import in a way that physics doesn't. Physics is shaped by politics. You know, physics had a big role in the history of the 20th century, no doubt. And all the different disciplines make choices about what matters to them and so forth in ways that are influenced by politics. But that doesn't mean it's all the same. I think that the differences matter as well as the similarities. What I'm interested in for my podcast is not politics in the sense of electoral politics, who's up and who's down and how you should run a race or anything like that. I'm interested in understanding very, very broadly. So I'm interested in understanding the wave function of the universe, but I'm also interested in understanding how political systems work. There's no hiding the fact, and I do not try to hide the fact, that I'm in favor of liberal democracy. And I think that liberal democracy is an especially interesting academic question. Why does it work? How does it work? How can we make it work better? But of course, it also overlaps with contemporary political questions. So I don't shy away from talking about politics on the podcast. All I ask is that my guests be devoted to understanding what is going on rather than just shilling for this or that political perspective.
Yeah. Thank you for all of that. I think that the problem that I have with the whole like all scholarship is political is that if all scholarship is political, then very easily no scholarship can be political. And it's very easy for things to, then it's just like we're all equally political. And it doesn't matter whether you're using your like population genetics expertise to be a eugenicist or not. And that distinction matters to me. But I think specifically with you seem to be asked a lot to defend atheism. And I find that kind of strange because like that would just not be my first question. My first question to a theoretical physicist would not be, oh my God, like, is God real and can you prove it? But that seems to be like what you are constantly again and again asked to debate about. Can I just ask like, your perspective on that? To me, it doesn't seem to be the most productive to continually ask you about your atheism. Maybe that's just because I'm an atheist as well, but I feel like that's a place where I'm more in the camp of like all scholarship is political, because I would think like, okay, theoretical physics, well, that definitely naturally eschews politics. And then it's like, wait, what? Sorry? Like, oh my God, then you get roped in by these theological debates. And that seems kind of like not even part of what you do.
Well, I am of the opinion that religion does many, many things, but one of the things it does is it tries to understand the nature of reality. In that aspect of religion, there is a very strong overlap with science. Science also tries to understand the nature of reality. I don't think that these are two separate areas of intellectual inquiry. There's plenty of things going on in religion that have nothing to do with the nature of reality. There's, moral and communal aspects as well, ceremonial, holidays, what you cook for Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever. I guess Thanksgiving isn't technically religion, but it's a civic religion. But there's nevertheless an overlap, even though there are also regions that don't overlap. So I think that it's actually important as scientists, as philosophers, as academics generally, to let the world know what the implications of our scholarship is for how they think about reality, especially since the kinds of things I do for a living with the kinds of things I study, the fundamental nature of space and time and things like that. There's no economic benefit for this, right? You're not going to make a better piece of technology. You're not going to cure any diseases or anything like that. Why in the world should the average member of the general public care about supporting this with their tax dollars? And I think that the answer is when we learn things about the universe, we have to tell people. We have to go out there and let them know what we found. And one of the things we found is that God doesn't exist. I would argue that that's something that we found by scientific investigation over the course of the last 500 years. I know that not everyone agrees, but that's okay. We can talk about it, but that's my perspective. So it would be weird that this one thing that we found that really does affect everyone's life in a very important way, we would choose to be silent about.
Yeah, I guess my lingering annoyance is that God wasn't a natural object to begin with, or something that exists in the same way in all kinds of cultures. And so it seems to me like there's also that kind of cultural relativism problem where I think, I mean, I'm not the most well-versed person in theological matters, but it seems to me there are a lot of different gods out there that people believe in.
Absolutely. I mean, and this is a huge issue with sort of thinking through atheism versus naturalism, because at least naturalism is pretty well defined. It's true that we don't know the final theory of the universe or anything like that, but we more or less have a pretty clear picture on the basic story that is being told by naturalism. Whereas religion is not a single point of view. Every religion is very, very different. There's literally nothing that you can say against religion as a whole idea that someone can't say, well, I'm religious and I don't think that, because, theism is not that well defined. And so I tell people if they want to believe in a God that is absolutely in hiding, that makes no difference whatsoever to the fundamental nature of reality or what happens in the world, then I can't stop you. I'm not here to correct you about that. I'm particularly targeted on God's conceptions of God that play a role in the functioning of the natural world.
So a big theme throughout your podcast is interdisciplinarity, because you interview such interdisciplinary people and you're always crossing boundaries. I mean, you're always exemplifying that becoming, not being thing, where you're interviewing someone from political science or from neuroscience or from psychology, and you're talking to people about all kinds of things. I really loved your interview with Cass Sunstein on liberalism. He's a great speaker and a nice guy, but totally different from what you study. So just those are some examples. But in an episode from 2022 with a psychologist and a neuroscience person, you referenced a quote by sociologist Max Weber, which is, "I am not a donkey. I do not have a field." And part of that, to me, is you have this kind of annoyance with disciplinary boundaries. And I do too. But you also have a real vested interest and fervent, no, it could be better if we did things interdisciplinarily. And you did a holiday message in 2021 comparing interdisciplinarity and great cocktail making. Cocktails and disciplines, what makes them great, right? It turns out it's sampling from a lot of different areas or ingredients. So talk to me about interdisciplinarity. Why is it so important? Why is this something that's kind of vexed you for a long time? Are you the donkey? Are you tired of being put into a field?
Well, people always ask you what you do really. When you're an interdisciplinary
Right.
researcher, they want to pin you down in some way. And I'm guilty of it myself, because there is academic reality. We hire people for jobs, we give out prizes, we collaborate with people. It's very convenient to have a label on what you do. And in fact, I'm a big supporter of the disciplines as such. I think that, there's plenty of good work being done by people who are just nose to the grindstone and working within their discipline to improve what that discipline is doing. I just don't think it's the whole story. And I think that if you compare the relative amount of emphasis given to standard disciplinary research versus research that is a little bit less comfortably fit into a single disciplinary box, we tend to give lip service to how wonderful interdisciplinary work is, but we don't actually tend to support it. We don't make it easy for young scholars to think that way, to get jobs, to get grant support or anything like that. We say and look, I'm both in a physics department and philosophy department. I get lots of emails and Zoom calls from people who want to know how to do what I do. And I have to be honest with them and say, don't. Or, don't start that way. Like the only way to really, be successful in two fields or like at the 99% level is to be successful in one field and then try to grow from there. If you try to do two very different things from the start, you're just not going to get hired, or at least you'll lower the chances that you will get hired. And I'm sorry that that's true, but I'm not doing you any favors in telling you to buck the system as a young person who doesn't have any support right now. So I really wish that we made it easier for people to do serious interdisciplinary work. And that's hard because a lot of disciplinary work is not interdisciplinary work is not serious. It's not good, right? It's kind of frivolous and dilettantish because people put an enormous amount of work into becoming an expert in one area in their discipline. And then once they do that, they kind of think they can just waltz into other disciplines and start proclaiming things. And the reality is not like that. If you want to do both physics and biology, you got to put as much work into understanding biology as you put into understanding physics or vice versa. And that's an enormous amount. You can say the same thing about history and economics and literature and chemistry, right? So that the all of the incentive structure of academia is to become an expert at one discipline and then stick to it and continue to succeed. A lot of people have become pretty good professors by not straying very far from their PhD thesis in terms of their research career. It's just not what I can possibly imagine doing. It's not how I'm wired. And I do think that there's a lot of really interesting work to be done crossing over here and there. But of course, the proof of the pudding is in the tasting. We have to see whether or not those kinds of approaches actually lead to important progress.
I also think it can be uninspiring from a student's perspective to see a professor who's doing so well, quote unquote, in the academy, but has never strayed from their dissertation research or just their very, very, very narrow field. Because some fields are able to carve themselves out more narrowly than others, and then they just get stuck. And that can be uninspiring.
Well, Talia, you and I might not be representative, so we have to be very careful that we're not projecting our ways of doing things onto the rest of the world. I think some people are perfectly happy. Look, I was a professor at Caltech for a long time, and the students there don't want to take humanities classes. Trust me. They're there to, take their sciencey classes, and that's what they want to do. And there's students at small liberal arts colleges who don't want to take the science classes. Trust me. And, and vice versa. So I do think that some people are like that, some people are not. I just think that the balance is a little bit off, and we don't quite have the institutional and structural wherewithal to really open ourselves up to all these great ideas that could be pursued more effectively if we tried.
So I know this is a while ago and maybe a soft spot, but you were denied tenure at Chicago. And at least I've heard you speculate that was in part because you were doing a bit more public communication. Can you speak a little bit about what it has meant for you to become this like public intellectual, public communicator, scientific communicator, and what impact that's had on your academic career?
I don't think it was actually too much about becoming a public speaker, a public intellectual, anything like that. Because when it happened, I had no trade books written. I didn't have a podcast, nothing like that. Like those things didn't exist. I had written a graduate level textbook in general relativity,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
and that played a very big role. But, even that, it's all very mixed up because I wasn't there in the faculty meetings where they talked about me. And it's not like it's a majority vote either. Even a small number of people who are against you can sink your case for tenure. So who knows what was said? I think some people just didn't like my research. And I think that other people thought that the fact that I had written this textbook, the fact that I put a lot of work into, organizing a conference and things like that, that was all a sign that I was not as devoted to doing research as I really could be. And, as I said once in a blog post, universities, top research level universities hire on hope, but they fire on fear, right? They hope that you turn into someone brilliant and productive, but they fire you because they're worried that you might not do just research all the time. There are some people, not that many, but there's some people who get tenure and then either do something else or don't do much of anything at all. And that's what they're worried about. So they kind of outsmarted themselves at the University of Chicago by, worrying too much about this. But there are people who do get tenure who had less publications than me, less citations than me, less good teaching evaluations than me, but they were much safer. They just fit into the boxes a little bit more comfortably.
Well, I think you've landed on your feet. I
I've done okay,
I
yeah.
think you're doing okay. Yeah. So you mentioned blog posts and interdisciplinarity. So I really, really like a couple of your blog posts from the early 2000s. I know we're going back a while, but in a blog post from 2006, you talked about Zizek and the universe. The title of the blog post is "The Universe is Structured Like a Language." And I really like this blog post because there's like so many things that are going on. So first off, you talk about Zizek as a Lacanian, or Jacques Lacan, right? And Lacan's famous quote, which is, "The unconscious is structured like a language." And then you go on to say, and I quote, "Which I take, not having any idea what I'm talking about, as a claim that the unconscious is not simply a formless chaos of mysterious impulses. Rather, it has an architecture, a grammar, rules of operation, much like those of our higher level consciousness." One way of summarizing, and then you bring in this like Seth Lloyd analogy, which is awesome. One way of summarizing Seth Lloyd's explanation of the origin of complexity might be the universe is structured like language. And so first up, we need to talk about the Seth Lloyd thing about the monkeys typing out Hamlet, because that's like been consequential for so many fields, including cognitive science. But then also, what I think is cool there is that I don't think you're quite right about what Lacan meant, but I think you're right about the universe being structured like a language in like a structuralist linguistic sense. I think Lacan was talking about signifiers and signifieds, and it's kind of like the semiotic system of the unconscious and meaning being derived from difference. But that's not what structural linguists mean when they talk about meaning. They don't think meaning is derived from difference. They think meaning is derived from logic and equations. And then that's how maybe the universe is structured. And this is like, it's a great blog post. I really encourage people to read it. So what's going on there with all this stuff?
Well, it's a great question that you're raising here because it's now 20 years later, sadly.
Yeah.
Were you even born when I wrote that blog post?
I was born. Yes, I was too. Yep.
So I'm still thinking about these ideas. A more recent solo podcast episode I did. I don't blog anymore because I do the podcast instead. This is basically
Right.
the limited bandwidth I have for yapping into the void. And I talked about this idea of complexogenesis. So why do complex structures come into the existence over the course of the history of the universe? The universe started very simple, and it will end very simple as far as we know, the heat death of the universe. And complex structures like you and me and the internet and whatever pop into existence through the laws of physics, working out their various ways without teleology, as far as we know, right?
Right.
And we know that that doesn't violate the laws of physics. There's this sort of bad set of arguments by creationists that the second law of thermodynamics is somehow in conflict with Darwinian evolution, et cetera. That's obviously not true in a very simple way, and people have pointed this out many times. But still, that doesn't say that just because something is allowed, it has to happen. And we don't have a very good handle on why, we can easily imagine evolutions of the universe in which complexity doesn't develop, right? When cream mixes into coffee, which is my favorite analogy here, you can imagine, stirring the cream in the coffee and seeing all these complex fractal patterns, but you can also imagine the cream and the coffee just sort of smoothly diffusing into each other. Those are two allowed evolutions. One looks complex, the other doesn't. So there's a really important question in my mind, why, in fact, does the evolution of the universe lead to these complex structures? And that's just a descendant of what I was thinking about there in 2006 with the structure in the laws of physics and the evolution of the universe. Of course, the universe obeys laws, right? There are the laws. That's fine. But the laws are layered, right? You have the fundamental laws, then you have these emergent laws at higher levels, and understanding the relationship between all of those and how you map one description to another one and how robust it is or how much it depends on contingent events. Is life very common in the universe or is it very uncommon? All of these are really interesting questions. fundamentally interdisciplinary, by the way. They don't belong in one department as we usually structure departments. And that's why I like them because, if everyone is working on something in my department, I don't want to work on it. I want to do something different. I want to find the important questions that people haven't paid enough attention to. That's hopefully where we can really make some fun progress.
Okay. Okay, so I like that. And I also think it brings up the Carly Simon line. I had some dreams. They were clouds in my coffee. But can you explain the Seth Lloyd monkey typing computer into a void? So my understanding of his idea is that he's trying to explain quantum computing. And he's saying that there are monkeys at these computers and they're typing out random strings of numbers and letters. And eventually they're going to write all of Hamlet word for word. But you're kind of you push back against that idea as an explanation for how everything works. But that idea, and that like, I guess, metaphor, had a really big implications for a lot of different fields and the way that we think about randomness and algorithmic thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the monkeys and the typewriter is a famous way of saying it, but an even more vivid way was in Borges's short story, The Library of Babel, where he says, look, imagine a library which has every book. Not only every book ever written, but every book that ever could be written. And how do you do that? Well, you just start with the beginning of the alphabet and you repeat it, through 400 pages of text. And then you modify it by one character and another character. And you just put every book that is every combination of every character. Now, he shows that the number of books is enormously large, way, way bigger than the size of the universe. But in principle, every book is there. Even if a book is, even if you imagine a book that's 1,000 pages, that's just, 2.5 400-page books. So there's some series of books, right? All of G.R.R. Martin's books that he hasn't written yet are there in the Library of Babel, but also all of the variations of them are there. So as Borges points out, the problem with the Library of Babel is that the card catalog is the same size as the library. There's no way of finding the interesting parts, right? They're all there, but that doesn't mean anything. In fact, you could shorten it, right? You could say, I'll just write books that are one character long. And then if I concatenate them together, I can make every book in the world. But that's just a meaningless statement. That's just saying that books are made of letters. So there is structure there in how real world patterns come about. It's not just typing randomly. And again, it goes, I forget exactly what Seth Lloyd said, so sorry about that. It's 20 years old, but I don't think that he was advocating the idea that the real world came about by random typing, but I really don't remember the details.
No, I don't think he was saying that. I don't think he was advocating it. Yeah, no, you're right.
But other people pretended that that's what people were saying. So famously, Fred Hoyle, who was a very sharp cosmologist and theoretical physicist, made fun of the idea of evolution, Darwinian evolution, because he said, look, it's like imagining that a Boeing airplane could just be randomly assembled by atoms just, being put together one by one. Like that's like what it's like to make a living being just through the random motion of the laws of physics. So I know the answer to that one. I know why that's not what the universe is. And the answer is because the early universe had low entropy. The early universe was not in a random state. It's very, 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 very far away from being in a random state. And I think that's the right lens to use to understand the origin of complexity, that the fact that the early universe was so non-random gives us an enormous resource, an enormous initial store of information that then smaller parts of the universe can make use of to become complex and functional and leveraging all that information to survive in a harsh and unforgiving environment.
Yeah, there's actually a website for is it called the Library of Babel? There's a website, and you can go and you can click and you can read, quote unquote, every book in the universe.
Just takes time.
It just takes time. What I find kind of ironic about that is that your point, right? So the size of that library is infinite, right? Or well, it's not infinite, but it's huge. It's larger than
it's not infinite, but it's huge.
It's not infinite. No, that's right. But if you were going to replicate that website today, it would not take at all very long at all with coding via AI.
It would not take long to write the program.
Nope.
It would take very long to run it. Because literally the library is bigger than the universe. You don't have a printer that could print out the Library of Babel. But you don't even need to worry about making the website because literally you have the algorithm in your head. Like that's the step.
Right. It's kind of mind-boggling though, in like a
Well, this is something I don't think that we, by we I mean, literally just the people who think about these things. I don't think we have a good grasp on the question of why the evolution of the universe takes us in these particularly interesting, complex directions. I think that there probably is an answer. I think lots of people have like parts of the answer assembled, but the full answer is not quite put together yet.
I have a question about metaphor. And I think this is pertinent to your entire career trajectory, like we talked about, because you've consulted on two Avengers movies and a couple of other films and things, and you're very in the kind of science fiction space. So again, a blog post from a long ago, from 2005, 21 years ago, or it's actually an article, From Experience to Metaphor by Way of Imagination. And you argue for an inextricable relationship between science and literature. You say science, an unapologetically reality-based activity, becomes fruitfully engaged with the work of literary imagination as source material for metaphors. Indeed, it is precisely because science is forced to conform to the natural world that it functions as such a productive supplier of allegorical raw materials. So, totally agree. But I also wonder if it goes both ways, if literature and the humanities supply allegorical raw materials to science as well. But then, I was thinking about what your claim is, and I was, going through, just the texts that I'm reading for my thesis, and I realized how true this is, how many scientific terms are used in literature, and then reinforce it. So even ideology, which used to be Marxist, and you got it from camera stuff, now ideology is this thing that you would use in physics to talk about the ideology, maybe theological ideology, being kind of imposed on you, and then you have to defend yourself from that.
Right.
But all kinds of things, right? We talk about chemical reactions and chemistry with actors on stage. I was writing down a bunch of stuff like parasite and viruses. And I feel all the time what I'm doing in my English papers is just using mathematical metaphors. I'm talking about topology or isomorphisms or an asymptotic relationship between a truth and a truth seeker or something. We have a little bit of economy. We have symptomatic reading. We have surface reading, reparative reading. These are all scientific metaphors. So this is clearly everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And I was just wondering if you could unpack that a little bit. And why is it? How did you even come to think about this long enough to write a 14-page article about it? And then become kind of a big deal in the consulting world for movies?
Well, those are two different questions. There's really no relationship there, as it turns out, historically. Like many of the things I've written in my life, I have many more things I want to write than time to write them. So having a deadline is the way that certain things actually come to pass. In the case of that particular article, I agreed to go to a conference that was held in Santa Barbara on drama and science, like drama, narrative, science, representation, something like that. And I was asked after the conference, we were all asked to write something up about what we were interested in. And then in between writing them up and them being published, the journal died. The journal that was going to publish all those articles ceased to exist. So they never got published. So that's just out there on the internet, but it's not a published paper. But, I thought that was before I'd done any consulting in Hollywood or anything like that. But I was struck by, and it's once again the same thing that we're already talking about. The space of possibilities is always much larger than we can comprehend. That's true for the space of scientific theories. It's true for the space of books in a library or novels or anything like that. The space of DNA, genomes, whatever. It's just very, very easy to have a combinatorial set of things where you just list one letter of an alphabet over another that very quickly becomes larger than the human mind can comprehend. And the question is, how do you search through the space of possibilities? For Darwinian evolution, you're searching through the space of genomes, looking for things that fit well into a fitness landscape. And sometimes you do badly, right? There are, these plants that have way bigger genomes than human beings do, even though they're fundamentally simpler creatures, because human beings have enjoyed a long evolutionary timescale over which we've managed to compress some of the information in our genomes a little bit. But the same thing is true for stories. If you were just asked to tell stories, tell fictional stories over and over again, For the most part, people would stick to the same kinds of stories. That's just easier to do than come up with something truly new. Like one great example is just time travel stories. Time travel stories in the sense that we now think of them started in the 19th century. They could have been written 2000 years ago, but nobody ever did. Like there are things that are similar, but they're not really quite the same. Why did no one ever think of that? And advances in science have this huge advantage that we are forced out of our comfort zones by trying to accommodate the data that we get from scientific experiments. And it's by being forced out of our comfort zones that we can be inspired to get new ideas, right? The analogy in biology is every time there's a huge mass extinction, something goes wrong either internally to the ecosystem, to the biosphere, or externally because of a meteorite or something like that. The ecosystem never completely dies. The biosphere is still there. And then immediately afterward, many, many new forms begin to flourish. They were being stifled by the success of the existing forms before the mass extinction, and now they can grow and do new things. Not that I'm in favor of mass extinctions as a regular event, but it does help for the complexity of the biosphere. So it's just another example how we'll never ever explore all of the space of ideas. And getting some help by being forced to consider new ideas is very helpful. It's the reason why the Dadaists wanted to use random numbers in making some of their art.
Are you ever conscious as a scientist of when a term that may or may not have originated within science gets borrowed into literary studies, say, and then comes back into science meaning something different?
I think that it does happen, and I think that, there are reasons to be annoyed when it's not even science and literature. This is any two fields can
Yeah.
have this
Oh, totally.
happen, right?
Yeah.
And one field borrows terminology from another field. Sometimes the meaning changes along the way, right? And people in the original field can be annoyed by it, but they shouldn't be. As long as you are clear about what you mean, everything should be fine. Language changes all the time, and I think that's a good feature of language, not a problem.
Yeah. I mean, well, definitely it's changing all the time, and we can't do anything to stop that. I do think I think I would like to think that I'm justified in my annoyance when, say, like a linguistic anthropologist misuses the term semantic bleaching when you are so close to the right answer. I mean, maybe you could just you could not bleach the term semantic bleaching. Like, please slow down with the irony.
Yes, I think that the more technical and specialized a term is, the more careful you should be about sticking to the proper meaning of it, because people will, of course, think that you mean what they hear you saying. And I do think that a lot of people don't appreciate the fact that when they use a term, they might have a little mental definition of it that differs from everybody else's. But if no one else knows what your mental definition is, you're not actually performing communication. You're just confusing people.
I kind of want to ask about counterfactuals here. If you could go back to school and study something else, what else would you study? Because I know you interview people from so many different fields. It's kind of remarkable. And you're able to talk about their research with great adroitness. It's really amazing. And you've interviewed, I mean, when I say like you interviewed Nobel Prize winners, like I think you've interviewed a Nobel Prize in physics, but you also interviewed Darren Acemoglu, who has a Nobel Prize in economics. Those are different fields. If you could go back and study something else, what would it be?
I think physics is a great starting point for doing lots of things. The other obvious thing that I would be interested in is some version. Well, if you had asked me 10 years ago, I would have said AI. But now everyone does AI, and it's much more boring to me because everyone else is already doing it. I could easily, start collaborating with people in my department doing AI things, but like, what am I really adding that they don't already have? I can't really think of anything. What my actual regret is not that I started out in physics, but that I didn't expand my horizons from physics much sooner. These days I'm getting very interested in complexity and philosophy and things like that. And those are both things that I bumped into as undergraduate or graduate student, but I didn't really pursue them. For years, I played a relatively mainstream theoretical cosmologist. And I think that I sort of started being playful and interdisciplinary much later than I would have liked. But the total sum of things that I'm doing right now is more or less what I want to be doing.
That makes sense. I think you have actually mentioned before, I can't remember which episode this was, but you talked about how so many of your interviewees often will say, "Oh, I started out in physics at MIT or something," and that's like a very common answer because it's a you think it's a great field. And that's just been like a quirk of things. But I mean, that is true. I think math and physics are kind of, they're seen as these like neutral-esque disciplines that matter for everything else, or that have engendered so many other disciplines, or the kind of the forefather of so many other disciplines, that it's like just, it's a solid foundation.
I think that's true, but I don't think it's the whole
Yeah.
story. I mean, I think just as we were saying, understanding something as well as you can in science means that you need to confront the data and be pushed out of your comfort zone. And to me, physics, as opposed, it's in a way that's different than, let's say, mathematics or chemistry in different ways. Physics pushes you the furthest out of your comfort zone. And the reason why is because physics is easier to understand than all those other things. Like chemistry and biology are a mess. And in physics, we can literally say with confidence what was happening a minute after the Big Bang, right? Like we have no idea what was happening at the origin of life, but we know a lot about what was happening minutes after the origin of the universe because physics is so simple, because you can have huge simplifying assumptions and still make progress in ways that is very difficult to do in studies of more complex systems. So physics is great for really pushing your intellectual thought processes in unanticipated ways. And so I think that's really why it is a good starting point for moving into lots of other fields. It trains you to, think carefully about what is important, what is not important, what questions can you answer, which ones can't you, when are you being well defined, when you're not. And these are skills that just, play out in many, many different areas of academic endeavor.
Can we clarify I feel like this relates to the teleology thing I was bringing up at the beginning, but there's an instinct, I think, in a lot of fields, but by a lot of just like people, perception of course our systems have a goal or an endpoint. Of course, biology, reproduction, right? Like, aren't we like hardwired to reproduce, like that kind of things? And you want to push back against that and say, no, our natural systems are not teleological. That's just the way they are. Something like political science would be, or there are plenty of things that are teleological in the world, but not our natural systems. Why is that?
Well, I think the way that I would say it is our fundamental natural systems are not teleological. Ever since Isaac Newton invented classical mechanics, there's no directionality to the laws of physics. There's no directionality in time. There's no difference between running the laws forward and running them backward in time. So there can't be any teleology. But of course, we live in a world, as I've written about at great length, with a pronounced arrow of time. And the resolution of those two facts, that the fundamental laws of physics have no arrow of time, but the world does, is that the world that we observe in our everyday lives is not the fundamental laws of physics. It's this much higher emergent level. And it is conditionalized on the fact that the Big Bang had a very low entropy. There's a past boundary condition, which, as far as we know, has no analog in the far, far future. So at the level of emergent higher level structures, things that are constituted by many, many different little pieces, obeying the second law of thermodynamics, it's possible to have goals. Like I have goals, right? And I'm still made of atoms, obeying the laws of physics. That's because there is an arrow of time. The interesting thing, and the thing that I don't fully understand, maybe somebody else understands it, but I don't, is where goals came from. It's an analogous question, a parallel question to the origin of complexity question, because the fundamental way of writing down why the past is different from the future is because we have a special condition in the past, low entropy near the Big Bang. But structures with goals, typically either biological structures or ones that have been constructed by biological structures, often have what you can think of as boundary conditions in the future. If I say I'm going to go to the store, you might not know what route I'm going to take to the store, but I'm trying to go to the store, right? That's a simple statement about a future goal that is very, very informative. So somewhere along the line of increasingly sophisticated use of information in the universe, biological systems gained the capacity to think about the future and set goals for themselves. And maybe think is actually even too strong. I think you could use that language even precognitively in some ways. But I don't quite understand how that happens. I'm sure that there's a story to be told about how that arises naturally out of evolution and the second law. I just haven't seen anyone tell it yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the whole thing of teleonomy, of things that are appearing teleological but aren't teleological. And I don't know if you just think that that's like a fun word for something that doesn't really need to exist or not. But I know that's something else that people are thinking about.
Well, I'm not I'm not super comfortable with that word just because I haven't used it a lot. But I
Yeah.
interviewed David Krakauer, who is the president of the Santa Fe Institute and a complex systems theorist, for my podcast. And he, when asked to define what he meant by complex systems research, he said the study of teleonomic matter, which I think is a little bit too restrictive, but it's certainly part of complex systems research. And I just kept up the conversation, assuming that teleonomic was more or less the same as teleological. But no, they're actually a little bit different. They're different in important ways. And so I should have been more on the ball there.
Interesting. Teleonomic matter. I feel like that, I mean, in some ways you could say that like validates the listener. It validates those who are reading the research. It validates like everyday experience. Maybe there's something less pretentious about that. I'm with you that I'm not really sure why we need the word, but I mean, I think that there could be many reasons.
Well, I think, again, the nice thing about higher level emergent structures is that you can understand them using a set of concepts that are nowhere to be found at the lower levels. So it's a remarkable fact that we have things in the universe that do seem to be goal oriented in very useful ways. And what does that mean? I mean, I could just tell you the location and velocity of every atom in a mouse that is running away from a cat. I tell you what the cat is, what the mouse is, et cetera, and run the laws of physics. Or I could just tell you the cat's running away from the mouse. And that's a much, much shorter, more compressed statement. And it gives you an enormous amount of information about what's going to happen next. You know, the mouse is not going to run right into the cat. It's going to run in the opposite direction. So that's just a fascinating fact about the universe, that these very, very pithy condensations of the informational content of the system are nevertheless extremely predictive. And I think that having goals is one way in which that can play out.
You are married to a professional science writer, and you are a really good writer, as I feel like hopefully we've evidenced, but in the quotes from your blog posts from 20 to 21 years ago. But you are a really good writer, and you do a lot of public communication. AI is a complicated topic because in so many ways I feel like you and I are probably both pro a lot of uses of AI because it's a really helpful tool for a lot of research.
Right.
But also, I would never, ever, 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 ever write something. Like, I would never use AI to write my podcast episode descriptions or my episode outlines or my papers. But I will never, ever, ever learn to code because
Too easy to ask.
ChatGPT can do that for me. And so maybe that's a problem, and maybe I should learn to code. So can you talk a little bit about writing in AI and kind of your thoughts and where you're using it?
Well, I think that it's very, very important to think through what the implications of AI are going to be. I am a little bit humble about my ability to correctly prognosticate how things will shake out. So I don't know. You know, my personal feeling is, like you say, it's perfectly good to use AI in your self-education, in your searching, in your learning, and you're trying to understand things better. I use it all the time. It is essentially never okay to cut and paste from an AI output into something that you label your work. Jennifer, who is a writer at Ars Technica recently had a kind of sad incident where they had one writer who was specializing in AI, and he did cut and paste from AI into his articles. And he was told that if he did that, he would be fired. And not only did he do that, but the AI that he cut and pasted from hallucinated quotes from a source. So he's no longer with the organization. So I think that, and I think a lot of people who I know and I respect a lot are too anti-AI, because I think that the AI companies are sort of pitching it in this kind of terrible, off-putting way as like replacing human creativity. in a lot of ways. And I think that AI is super useful, but not for replacing human creativity, for other things. And I think that they're worried about super intelligence, and I'm worried about super stupidity. So I have a lot of thoughts about AI, but they just don't align very well with the most common thoughts that are in the AI space right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely concerned in some ways. I mean, I was talking to a friend and we were talking about how like he was reading out some quote about how it incapacitates us. And that definitely is like a worry. Like I worry that in 5 years I'll just like I won't be able to send an email or write a text without checking with this okay to send because like is the professionalism right? Like am I being polite? Things like that. Like I don't want to turn into that.
Yeah.
I was writing emails for years before this ever came along and it was fine and it's going to be okay. And I was sending text messages. But I am excited about not necessarily needing to learn all of computer science in order to scrape a website. I scraped like your entire RSS feed last night and put it all in a spreadsheet and it was awesome. And I was able to do that in like 3 minutes. Isn't that amazing? And I don't have any code. I mean, the main thing is scale, right? Like AI is really good for scale.
Yeah.
And so I am actually really excited about the products that are going to be built and the things that are going to be discovered because we can do things at scale. I'm really excited about the ed tech sector actually more than anything. Education is so important to me because it's been so powerful in my life and it's like the thing that I love so much and I love the university like you do too. And I think that more people should be able to access educational resources and so I'm excited about that part. But I think that accessing those educational resources and then offloading education to AI those are different things. And I think I would just be sad to live in a world where people didn't care about writing or actually reading something for themselves.
Well, I mean, historically, skills do get lost.
Yeah.
But I think that the more realistic worry to me is that skills will become sort of niche and boutique. There will still be great writers, but many people won't have any idea how to write. And that will be sad, but I think that kind of thing is inevitable.
Yeah. I have a question about your, podcasting, I think broadly, but I know that there's a lot of conversation right now about accessibility of research and accessibility of scholarship. And people talk about there's like the plain language movement. There's all these kinds of things. And I will put my cards on the table. I don't think we need that. I don't think that's necessary. I'm not here for that. And the reason is that I think that if something's going to be accessible, that means that it should be free. We don't need to dumb down anything we're saying. We can keep it exactly as dumb or smart as we want, but I think it should be free. So like your podcast is free. It has ads. Please, so happy that your podcast is profitable. I mean, it's true for one of us. But it's free and I can listen to it for free and you can listen to my podcast for free. And I think like that's what we need. And I can go on YouTube and I can take entire courses for free on the internet. That's remarkable to me. I can go and I can have Raj Chetty speak to me for hours on end about public economics and taxation. And I can watch Jonathan Gruber tell me why universal health care is better. That's awesome. I can take an entire linguistics class. It's amazing. But I wanted to see where you stand on this because your podcast is actually really hard. Like, I don't understand everything you say. I don't understand everything your guests say. And I understand a bit of it, like a lot of it, the majority. but yeah, I mean, where do you stand on that? Because your podcast is definitely a little bit more advanced, I'm guessing, it's more exclusive than mine, you could say. But it's also free.
Well, I think that the nice thing, like you're absolutely right, that it's wonderful how many free resources we have out there on the internet right now. And I'm also a big believer in ad-supported models. I think it's great. And people don't appreciate, like, that's why you're getting this stuff.
Yeah.
Because someone is getting a little bit of money from the ads for it. You know, it's true. You could imagine a world in which the ads weren't there, but then much of the content wouldn't be there either. And so it's a relatively low price to pay. But I also think that as a result of that, as a result of the tremendous number of things out there, we should have a broader spectrum of what kinds of things are out there. It doesn't need to be the same thing over and over again. Not just the same content, but pointed at exactly the same audience over and over again. I know that my podcast is never going to be one of the top 10 podcasts in the world, right? Like it just doesn't appeal to that many people. I'm kind of shocked that it appeals to as many people as it does. But to them, I think I'm providing a really useful service. And I'm not primarily in the podcasting game for the salary, for the money. I wouldn't be doing it if I weren't interested in what was going on. So it just works out really, really well for me that I can do something I like and other people like it too.
I mean, so you've been on Joe Rogan years ago, but you were on Joe Rogan. And to me, that, I don't know, maybe that complicates what you just said, because his podcast, he's interviewing people like you and other academics and also people that are not academics.
Yep.
But his podcast is really successful. So it's true that maybe your podcast will not be in the top 5 podcasts ever, maybe. But I think a podcast like yours definitely could be, because Joe Rogan's done it and he interviews a wide range of people. But I mean, you interviewed him before he became one.
I know, I was on there pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic, yeah, exactly. That's the word. But there is something to be said for how much he's done, the people that he's interviewed.
I think that I have respect for the craftsmanship of people who do a certain kind of thing that is super popular. Like Dan Brown, the guy who wrote the Da Vinci Code, right? Like, real literary authors have great fun making fun of Dan Brown for how bad of a writer he is. But he sold millions and millions of books. He's doing something right, even if it's not what you value. Joe Rogan is doing something right, even if it's not necessarily educating the people. He has a skill. Like, he doesn't prepare for these podcasts. Like, I have been on a couple of times. Like, he's not like reading from notes. He's just able to have someone in, and he'll do 3 podcasts a day, and they're 3 hours long, and just someone comes in and he starts talking to them. Right. And that is a skill. It's not necessarily, like we said, the only skill you want to have, but it's also not just the popular version of a podcast like mine, because he's not trying to, systematically explain some difficult thing. It's much more about, like, who are you? What do you do? What are the cool ideas, et cetera? When someone has a book coming out and they're going to be on my podcast, the thing that I live in fear of is they have something really, really interesting to say in the book that I miss because I didn't read it carefully enough, and then I don't give them a chance to talk about it on the podcast, right? Like, my job is to give the guest a chance to say their interesting stuff. And, Joe Rogan may or may not do that, but, most of his guests are like comedians and musicians and actors and things like that. And, the occasional academic is a change of pace. For me, it's the other way around.
Right. Yeah, I share that fear with the book thing. People, especially when they have a book coming out, they have an agenda, and you want to make sure that they accomplish their agenda. You do.
Yeah. I mean, they've put a lot of work into writing a book. There must be a reason why. I would like to know the reason why. Let me ask you, what do you conceive of the purpose of your podcast as?
Thank you for the question. That's a great question. I think it's similar to yours in that I really hope I can be a resource for people to learn about linguistics, language, cognitive science, computer science, anthropology, like whatever it is.
Uh-huh.
I really hope I'm a resource. And I think that I have begun to be kind of more of like a material resource in the sense that I know that some professors are now putting me on syllabi. That's exciting. But I think that there's the personal part, and there's like the part for me, and then there's the part for everyone else. So I hope I'm a resource. I hope I can kind of like prove by example that like this is something that we can do, and we can have conversations with professors, and we can talk about these things, and this is fun. This is awesome.
Yeah.
I like challenging myself. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but I love it. I mean, I get to like for hours, I just get to listen to your podcast or read your papers, or I listen to your entire oral history interview that you did years ago. It's 4 hours long, but I listen at like 2 times speed. So it's like 2 hours. So there's that part. And I love meeting academics. I love talking to academics. So there's a huge like personal benefit for me and an intellectual benefit. And I feel like I'm learning so much. But I just hope that I can be a resource. And then I think also sometimes people will ask me in kind of disbelief, like, how did you do that? Or how did you get these people? And I'm just like, oh, I emailed them. And I think that the best response is that they can say, oh my God, and I could do that too. Some people just like don't, it doesn't compute. And I've definitely gotten a lot of like some sexism around like, how could this possibly happen? Yeah, I've had some weird questions. But like in some ways you could say that that's like I wouldn't get that kind of sexist response if I didn't have this thing going. And so I'd rather have this thing going than not. So that's great. But I think overall, I hope I can be a resource and example. Yeah.
I feel bad sometimes because sometimes my guest get sexist comments, and I try to, delete them or whatever. But if someone is going to be sexist and email the guest, I can't really prevent that in any way. I try to have a variety of people on the podcast in various ways, and that's just life in the public eye to some extent.
Wait, someone like people will come on your podcast and then someone will email them afterward? Because what? Like, oh, you could never get a PhD? Or like...
Oh, no, it's like, I don't like your voice.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Also, I think you're an idiot, but like the various usual things. Like the standards for being female in the public sphere are not the same
Yeah.
as for being male. So, and nothing I can do about it. I want to bring women onto the podcast.
Yeah.
And just let them be smart, or trans people or whatever. I've had various trans people on the podcast, and it's not usually about talking about trans issues. It's talking about what they do for a living. And I think that's just a good way to normalize people's place in the world. But they will get nasty comments. I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I actually don't know if any of the women that have been on my show have gotten nasty comments. I typically don't get random weird comments from people on the internet. I typically get like people just like to my face will just like not get it and will say things.
What you said that it's your last year. Do you want to keep up the podcast?
Of course.
Okay.
Like,
it's a lot of work.
Of course. Yeah. So it's going to be 4 years in like 2 weeks. It'll be like, or 3. It'll be 4 years since I started. I started in March of 2022. And it's so much work, but I love it. And it's also like life sustaining. Like I get really anxious when I don't have an interview on the horizon, or when I'm not, when I'm like procrastinating and I can't procrastinate by editing audio. It's actually like really important to me that like it's just become like such a part of my life. So I love doing it. I would never not want to do it.
For what it's worth, I get a lot of requests to come on podcasts, and I almost always say no, but you made a good case.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, thank you. I hope I've lived up to my case. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. That's valid.
I wish I could do them all. Like the things don't scale, right? Like I do have a friend who is a Nobel Prize winner, and he gets so many emails from high school students who say, my teacher told me to email a Nobel Prize winner.
Right.
He's like, I can't possibly answer all these things. And I hope that people do understand that, most of my efforts in public facing communication are either me writing books or me doing my own podcast. And the combination of those two is already like a little bit too much. So I just can't appear on that many other people's podcasts, but I do want to support the good ones.
Thank you. Yeah. The thing that I hope that I can do, that I know that not every podcast host does, you do this, but like is really research the person and really read their work. I mean, that definitely happens. I think that it's really sad for me when because I listen to a lot of I listen to a lot of podcasts. It's market research.
Yeah.
But when I listen to podcasts, sometimes it'll just become clear that the host like didn't even read someone's CV or Wikipedia page or website.
Oh, I've listened to those episodes. Yes.
Right. You listen to those episodes. Right. And so I never want to do that. But I also never want to like ask. I'm not interested in like stories from your time in undergrad or grad school. Like, no, that's not
like, yeah. If you were a tree, what tree would you be? Is not a question I'm ever going to ask anybody. But
is that a question that you've gotten? I've never gotten.
No, that's a famous question that Barbara Walters used to ask people when she was interviewing people before you were born.
Barbara Walters would ask that question?
Yeah.
Now I'm just thinking, the only interview I feel like I've seen front to back by Barbara Walters once was she interviewed Monica Lewinsky, and I don't think she asked Monica Lewinsky what kind of tree she would be if she were a tree.
Look, it's all good. Some people like that kind of stuff. I joked on a recent episode of my own podcast, I think on the AMA, that they just came out with Grammy Awards for podcasts. I don't know if you knew that, but neither one of us won.
I listened to this episode. Neither one of us won. And you know what's so interesting about that, Sean, is that the episode that won has so much funding and money.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Well, that's not interesting. That's not surprising at all. But look.
Not surprising at all, but
also good. That's the thing. Like, I'm perfectly happy that Amy Poehler won the best podcast. Like, it's clearly not the criteria are such that podcasts like ours are never going to win. But if one where it's just celebrities chatting to each other has to win, it's a good example of the genre.
I guess I'm a little bit more about it because, like, I don't know. I actually don't listen to The Good Hang in full, but sometimes clips will appear on, my various feeds. And so far, I've learned what time Gwyneth Paltrow makes her dinner reservations at. and certain other things about people's morning routines. I've things like that. But that hasn't changed my life, I guess I will say. Whereas like sometimes I will stop and I will think about things that people have said on your show or on various other shows, and that will have an effect on the way that I like engage with the world. But I typically don't bring up in conversation, well, Gwyneth Paltrow makes her reservations at 5:45 to 6.
Why are you listening to the Gwyneth Paltrow episode?
That was just like a clip that like came on my feed, and I was like,
listen to Adam Scott. He's much better.
Oh, I love Adam Scott. Oh, I should listen to Adam Scott.
You should listen to that one. Yes. But also, there was on Blue Sky today, someone was, I don't know if you're following the Senate primary race in Maine. So Susan Collins is the Republican from Maine who finally is in danger of losing her Senate race. So the question is, who are the Democrats going to nominate? And there's two Democrats running. And one is like a woman who used to be the governor, and she's like every stereotype of the old school establishment, unexciting Democratic candidate. And the other is this young guy with a beard who's like folksy and whatever, but he's also a bit of a Nazi. He's like a progressive Nazi, and he has a Nazi tattoo and the whole bit, but he's winning. He's winning the race by a lot. And so this story does have a point. The point is, he recently appeared on a podcast that, had strong anti-Semitic overtones. And someone was trying to defend him on the internet by saying, like, look, do you know how hard it is to appear on podcasts and not appear on an anti-Semitic one? They're everywhere. And I just was thinking, like, it probably is not that hard to not appear on the anti-Semitic ones. But in the world of all podcasts, I'm kind of happy that Amy Poehler won rather than some of the very, very bad ones that could have.
When you put it like that, oh my God, I'm so glad. Yeah. Thank you, Amy. Wow. That's a Taylor Swift song title. No, seriously, wow. Okay, when you put it that way, we really must say thank you, Amy. Yeah, I don't listen to the anti-Semitic ones. Interesting. I mean, but there are... Yeah,
somehow I've managed to avoid that. It's weird, right?
I've managed to avoid them. Yeah, me too. So, Sean Carroll, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a blast. And I guess that would be funnier if you were an experimental physicist. But as you say, theoretical physics is really important. So it wasn't a blast. It was theoretically awesome, I guess. I don't know. It's like the opposite of a
It was
blast.
A lot of fun. That's the important thing.
It was a lot of fun.
And it was my pleasure to come on. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Tomato Tomato. I've been your host, Talia Sherman, and that was Sean Carroll, the Homewood Professor of Natural Philosophy at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you very much, sincerely, from me to you for listening, whether you have been listening for the first time or for all 4 years that this podcast has now been in existence for. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe, but most importantly, pass along the podcast. Forward your favorite episode to a friend and forward your least favorite episode to an enemy, but make sure to forward the episode. You can also check out YouTube for select clips from interviews and stick around for more episodes. I'll speak to you next time. Bye.